Krishna certainly doesn't need any introduction. So everyone is here in the meeting primarily for him, but still few words need to be said. So this is in fact our concluding session of our Students' International Festival, Tattvankura, which during these troubled times has in fact contemplated on the very nature of darkness of our times. So Tattvankura is not a festival in the usual sense of the term, but it has contemplated on the very nature of darkness of our times, of our contemporary times, through the media of arts, different art forms, be it poetry, be it film, music, etc. So through the creative expression, students have tried to respond to the contemporary times, try to be with it and to transcend. So to conclude, we have none less a person than Shri T.M. Krishna. Needless to say that he is a vocalist, but he is a vocalist and a writer with a difference. A vocalist and a writer, because not many vocalists are really vocal on many of the issues, and he is vocalist in that sense, and he also writes on various issues, including art, and rather he connects art with society, with our surroundings, and writes. His books, A Southern Music and Voices Within Carnatic Music, they are not simply books of history, but they are primarily books of philosophy, aesthetics, sociology, and history. So looking at history of music from philosophical, aesthetic, and sociological point of view, he is reshaping art, is almost a manifesto for redefining, re-experiencing, reorienting art. Some of the chapters in that little book, manifesto, which reminds me of another manifesto. Essence of art, art and society, caging of art, caste and music, art and identity, spirit of art. So these are some of the chapters in that little book, Reshaping Art. His Sebastian and Sons brings out the less spoken areas of Carnatic music. His Svanubhava, his Sumanasa, his Shabda, all these experiments make him, Krishna, a different person. Spirit of Inquiry, in fact, is his latest book, which everyone needs to read. In fact, in one of his talks, which I have heard, is titled as Beauty and Ugliness. So in that talk, we can see his deeper engagement with the nature of the art, with the notion of beauty, with the philosophy of aesthetics itself. There, in fact, he describes himself as a man of sound. Of course, he's a very sound man who also makes different sounds at different times. Not just of music. He says that he's a man of sound, not even of music, but he understands the whole world through the medium of sound. So these are his words. He understands the whole world through the medium of sound. The talk itself is a live example of how contemplative and philosophical he can become on art itself. I've heard this talk, Krishna, I thought I would just mention it to you. And that is his art also. That art of speaking, that art of contemplation, along with speaking. So in our department of Gandhian Center for Philosophical Arts and Sciences, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal. We also have two postgraduate programs, Ecosophical Aesthetics, Art and Peace Studies, and also another undergraduate program that is being introduced, Aesthetics and Peace Studies. So trying to bring aesthetics and peace together. A critical appreciation of different art forms like theater, music, dance, cinema, literature, visual arts, trying to put them together from a philosophical, ecosophical perspective. So that is the idea. And now, of course, in the department, we are also trying to explore the interconnection of all these art forms and how they can also add meaning to life, like music, theater, dance, cinema, literature, visual arts, etc. And what can art do is also our perennial engagement. And we are also quite eagerly waiting to listen to T.M. Krishna, the MAHE Award winner, and also with an interaction with him on this perennial question of what can art do? What can art do? So I welcome once again on behalf of everyone, T.M. Krishna and all of you for this much awaited moment. Thank you.
Art in its nature itself is abstract and experiential. T.M. Krishna, being an exceptional artist, have a very rare quality to finely articulate the profundity of art through his writings. Understanding what art is, the role of art, especially in the present time, is a necessity. They have been waiting for this moment to hear you, sir, since a very long time. I kindly request Mr. Krishna to address on what can art do.
Good afternoon and thank you for having me. I have not come here with a prepared speech. I don't have anything to read from. Let's inverse the entire question. Let's start with the presumption art can do nothing. I want all of us to reframe our head for the sake of understanding. Because when we ask the question, what can art do, we are presuming it can do something. The inbuilt presumption is that art can do something, and we are here to investigate what it can do. Suppose we break down that presumption entirely and say art can do nothing. Okay? If all of you can just think as I speak, as I ramble, whatever I say, keeping aside your emotional connection to art and your moments that you treasure so much, just dump that and say art is nothing. Okay? It is just a creation of the human mind, of geographies, of cultures, and it truly cannot do anything to society. And that we are just simply maybe fooling ourselves, because the human species fools ourselves constantly. We are experts at doing it. Every construction we create is a way of fooling ourselves that something is correct and something is wrong, which is why we build things, right? So suppose we say we built this also in order to, shall we say, create another place where we believe something special can happen. So suppose we start from there, that art can do nothing. So we can start asking the question, okay, then why is there art? If it can do nothing, why at all do we have something called art? First, we have to all come to one common space, that art is not something that is found everywhere. I think that fundamental philosophical understanding has to start. That art is something that we as a species have created. Art is not something available freely that we have adapted, right? So this is one. The other thing we have to keep in our head is the idea of something being pretty has nothing to do with the fact of whether it's art or not. Okay? A lot of things can be very pretty. Some can be pretty to one person's eyes here. There are about 100 people here. Each of you will find something pretty. Okay? So don't presume that because you find something beautiful or something that you cry for or something that you feel deeply about, just because a human being feels deeply about something, it doesn't make it a necessity or doesn't make it profound. Okay, so let's be very clear about that also. The point is that our personal, for lack of another word, I'm using the word, a personal gain, which can be emotional, psychological, in different fashion. A personal gain from a certain experience cannot define that object that is giving the experience. right? Because our personal experience comes from so many layers. You think of your grandmother, you think of your grandfather, you think of some song that you when you were a child. Each one has these connections, and they're all going to make you feel in a certain manner. That doesn't mean that the object is necessarily art, right? Okay, say we throw that out. Then am I saying art is just habit? Is it just a habit that each group cultivates within itself and calls art? Depending on where you're born, depending on where you are, depending on the colors that you've seen from your childhood, depending on the sounds that you've heard from your childhood, depending on the movements, depending on the language, the dialect, etc., etc., we build these notion and we call X art, right? So then, is it just habit? Is it like brushing your teeth every morning? Because from the childhood you've been brushing your teeth. My father always used to say, "Don't brush your teeth; cows don't do it." So something like that, right? So is it just an habit? Okay. So maybe art does nothing. Maybe it's just a habit. Maybe it's just something you're used to, and something you're psychologically willing to just create in your mind. You trigger the right hormones, you trigger the right sensations, and voila, you have a divine experience. Is it just that? It could be. Don't discount anything I'm saying. Okay, it could be any of this, right? Because we all do this. Be very honest. We all do this. Every one of us do this. Okay. Then I said prettiness. Okay, let's look at the idea of beauty. So how do I know something is beautiful? Have you ever asked ourselves that question? How do I know something is beautiful? Do I know? Do I feel, first of all, that something is beautiful? You listen to a tune, ha ha, you say aha, but what is this aha coming from? Is it coming from the sound or is it coming from you? What is the connection between the sound and you? Is there a connection? So, this notion of beauty, whether it's sound, whether it is light, whether it is movement, okay, and contrastingly, the opposite, which for me is far more difficult to handle, is the notion of ugliness. Something is unpleasant, something is noisy, something is not music. Something is music, something is not music. Let me give you an analogy that I use very often. In India, there's a simple idea of singing in pitch, or like we would say, singing in shruti, if you know music, right? Now, we think it's such a simple idea. But I can tell you that every form of music has a different idea of singing in pitch itself. To some people, Carnatic music is half the time out of pitch. To some people, Hindustani music is also out of pitch. So there is this notion of pitch perfect recognition by some children in Western music. They can naturally, if you just put any sound, they know it's D, C, whatever it is. Now, to them, half the time when I'm saying C, I'm not singing C. I'm definitely singing out of pitch. I can be a master of Carnatic music. So, am I in pitch or not? That's this question, and I have an answer. So, to somebody else, I was off tune. We think it's such a simple notion. Everybody should sing in pitch. What's the big deal, boss? It's a big deal. So, what do I mean? So, if somebody else heard what I sang in their habituation out of pitch, it is not even music then. Then is it art? Can it move? Can it change them? Can it be a part of their lives? I'm just throwing all these things out. I don't have solutions to anything I'm addressing here. Okay, so we have this idea of beauty. This is complicated. Habit is complicated. Even what you consider, your own memories are complicated, right? We know it is not natural. We know you have created it. So, in this total mess, what can music do or what can art do? Is it doing something or are you doing something? That's the very interesting question here. Is it doing something or are you doing something? Let's address one more little note around this. So, in this mess, what is this art for art's sake? We love that phrase, especially musicians who don't want to discuss anything else in life. We'll all say, I do art for art's sake. Art never asked you to do anything for its sake. It never came and said, please do practice me only for my sake. It didn't beg you. We are only using that expression. So, if I say art for art's sake, Now, the most important word used twice there is art. It is used in two different connotations. Since it's a gathering of philosophical discussion, let's philosophically analyze this one line. Art, first, it's an object for art, which means that you're giving a reasoning for the object, and you're then giving a sake, which is actually an action, could be taken as an intention, shall we say. So now in this formation, what is art? None of us have defined. But we all have, as I discussed this in our head, what we think art is. Every one of us, 106 people or plus people sitting here, when I said art for art's sake, either they nodded their head or somehow understood what it meant. Everybody understood what it meant. Right? No, but what does it mean? For art's sake, it means what? Art is somewhere in between midair, not connected with society at all. That is an experience that is beyond our temporal qualities, our temporal being. But we just discussed for 10 minutes about how everything that we do is so associated with what we are. Beauty, habit, everything. Now, in between all this, we are suddenly saying art for art's sake. So suddenly, we are plucking this idea, which we created, giving it a position detached from us, and saying we are doing it for that position, which we don't know. Now, there can't be something more bizarre and ridiculous than this kind of intellectual jugglery. There is no philosophical basis to that statement at all. Let me tell you, I don't care if it was told by the most intelligent person in the world for 200 years. It's a ridiculously wrong statement. And we have to be brave enough to see the ridiculousness of the statement. That courage each one should have. Now, if I now have tumbled that and said art for art's sake is nonsense, say I've said that. But can we reframe it? I'll end over there. Okay. Or maybe it was said in a different notion. Maybe I am just being too critical for the sake of being critical, because CM Krishna loves to be critical, right? So maybe I'm just trying to be critical and just kind of provoke all of you and make you all feel uncomfortable with everything I've said. It's possible. I function that way. It's quite possible. Huh? Don't rule that out. Don't believe anything I say. Please don't believe anything I say. Okay? So then maybe we need to relook at art for art. So fundamentally, then we have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, but what do we mean by art? We go back to the primary question. After all this circle, we go back to the primary question of saying, what do we mean by art? We are saying it is partially habit, we can't deny it. It is partially just memory, we can't deny it. It is partially an association with prettiness, beauty, ugly, we can't deny it. Now, and it is partially also something that moves us deeply, we can't deny it. At the same time, what is it? Is it just a culmination of all this? If it's a culmination of all this, then it cannot do much. It functions within these parameters, then every society within those parameters will let it function. Now, don't get me wrong, even this functionality has some role. Nobody can deny it. I am not going to the ethics of that functionality. I am not going to ethical commentary on it, but it has a function. It creates community. It creates identity. It creates everything that is wrong with the idea of nationhood. It creates in a microcosm. I am now extrapolating it completely to the idea of nationhood. It's no very different from what art can create within one little microcosm. Identity, commonality, reason why we should belong, who belongs, who doesn't belong, who should be allowed to belong, what are the boxes that person has to tick to belong, when will a person be thrown out. This is how art can function, and it has a function, however ugly it may be according to me. But then, is there something else? Now, I think the only thing I'll end with is, yes, I do believe there is something else first. Yeah. But it has to go back to each of us seriously looking at what we mean by art. Say all of us sitting here practice, or I'm sure we all participate in some fashion with some art form. As listeners, as practitioners, could be whatever. I think all of us do in our own way. So the question we have to ask is actually not the question about art, but a question about ourselves. What is our participation in it? And why do we participate? Let's start from that question. Beyond these reasons for participating, is there any other reason? All these reasons we already defined. Is there any other reason? Does art do something else to us at all beyond these reasons? Because in that answer, or in that, shall we say, direction, we also find the reason of why human species created the idea of art and various genres which keep changing, various ways of expression across the globe. Right? Because if we don't find anything really precious beyond all this, our whole discussion is a waste of time. Because art is not different from ritual. How is it different from ritual? Ritual is memory, ritual is habit, ritual is pretty, ritual is everything. So unless we are able to find something else beyond these conditionalities that art gives us as an experience, we are not able to find truly philosophical centering for art. Okay, I am not going to various kinds of art. I'm not going to all that because that's also complicated. I agree there are further layers to it, but let's not go there today because that has to go specifically. So I'm going to leave you with this question, and I'm not going to give you what I think is a direction. I've spoken about it before, but today I'm not going to do it. I want every one of you to try and see if you find that. So we say art is transcending. So why are we having this discussion? Because of first presumption that art can do something. Now, when we said do something, what were we all talking about? I never defined it, but everybody understood what we were talking about. Interesting, isn't it? This do something was not defined in this discussion at all. I never defined it in the beginning. I only spoke the other direction. So what is this do something? We are talking about transformation of the human species. We are talking about philosophy of ethics. We are talking about peace. We are talking about bridging communities. We are talking about transcending. We are talking about all these beautiful words that everyone who thinks he or she is progressive loves to use. Okay? We just love to use those words. I am including myself in this. I am not only pointing fingers at you. I am as much in love with these words as anybody else. Sometimes even I don't know why I use it. I think sometimes I use it just to proclaim my identity. Of course I do. I know I do it. And I'll be the first one to acknowledge that. Right? So, therefore, when we use these, when it says transcend, it can. So, can it really transcend if we don't find for ourselves that meaning for it? Otherwise, it is only a habit that is positioning a narrative. That is only telling a story that you want to tell. Right? Whoever that you is. And depending on the power of the individual trying to tell the story, you will listen to it or not. It may not even reach you if the power of the community that is telling the story does not even exist. Right? So when we say transcending, we are saying something that smothers all these temporal inequalities, perceptions and judgments and can still do something. That something has to be able to somehow go beyond these trappings that we have also created, that we are participants of. Whether it's possible or not, I am not going to say. I don't know. Maybe it is not possible. Maybe it is possible. Let us not presume any philosophical questioning with a presumption of what we already want to believe and feel comfortable about. No philosophical inquiry can begin from that fundamental faith in something. Even if it is the most beautiful thing in life, even if it is peace, let's not presume it. Because the moment we presume it, we are just campaigners of a narrative. We are not truly philosophically actually inquiring about it. Okay? I'm going to leave you with this much confusion, which I think is confusion at least.